Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel and welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over how to set up toast notifications within our web application by using Go and HTMX. And for JavaScript, we'll be using Alpine.js since it's a good middle ground between vanilla JavaScript and a full-fledged framework like React, Svelte or Vue. To make all of this easier to understand and to follow, the video will be divided into multiple parts. First of all, we're going to set up the project from scratch, a Go and HTMX project. We are going to install everything that we need. Then we are going to set up the client-side toast notifications, which we can trigger from our browser. And finally, we'll see how we can trigger those toast notifications once we make a request to our backend by using HTMX. And I'll also leave a link in the description down below so you can access the repo for this video. And for each one of the steps of this video, there is going to be a different branch that you can take a look at and see exactly what changes were made during each part of the video. First, we want to start by initializing a new Go project. So to accomplish this, we want to type go mod init and then the path to our repo. In this case, it is going to be github.com/webdevfuel/go HTMX toast notifications. So let's press here return, and now this new go.mod file was created. And so since we want to, in this step, set up the routing inside of this project, we want to start by installing our routing package, which is going to be the she router. So let's paste this here, and we want to say go get and then github.com/go she, then she, and we also want to specify the version, which is version 5. Now let's navigate to our code editor, and we want to create a new file, which we'll call main.go. And inside of this file, we want to paste the following contents. We start by specifying the package name, which is main, and then inside the main function, we want to initialize a new router with the she package. Then we want to add a basic middleware to log all of our requests. And then each time that we make a request to the base path, we want to simply return this hello world message. And then we want to listen and serve on localhost port 3000. Now let's give this a try. So we want to type here go run dot. And then if we open here a new pane and with curl, we make a request to localhost and then port 3000. As you can see, we get this hello world back, and then the request gets logged here to the console. And finally, to do the initial setup of this project, we want to create a new .git ignore file. And since we'll be using in the following steps air to be able to run our server and automatically restart it each time that we make a change to our project, we want to also add here this temp directory to be ignored by Git each time that we commit our changes to this repo. So let's save this. If you want to learn more about how to build web applications with HTMX, Go, and PostgreSQL, then go to webdevfuel.com/hgsb or click the link in the description down below to join the HTMX Go SaaS blueprint. And now we are ready for step 2, which is to set up templ. Now, if you don't know, templ is essentially a templating engine within the Go ecosystem, which allows us to also have type safety within our templates. First of all, we want to install templ locally within our project. So let's type here go get and then github.com, then and finally /templ. So let's press return, and as it says here, templ was added to our project. Templ is a bit different from all of the other packages within the Go ecosystem, and the reason for this is because we need to have the templ executable globally available to us so that we can run templ generate. So we'll have templ templates, which are essentially files that end with the templ extension, and then each time that we generate our templates, templ will generate Go files for each one of those templates. To install the templ executable globally, we simply need to type here go install, and then we need to specify this path. So it is the exact same one, and then we want to type here cmd and finally templ, and then add latest to specify that we want to install the latest version. Now we are ready to add the first template to our project. So let's first of all create here a new template directory, which is where we are going to place all of our templates, and we'll create one here that we'll call hello.templ. And inside of this, let's paste the following contents. And as you can see, we have here the package name, which is template. Then we also have here this layout, which we'll get to in just a second. And then this template is going to have this publicly available function. So since this starts with a capital letter, this is going to be publicly accessible by other packages within our Go project. And this is going to take one argument, which is a string, and then it is going to return this div that says hello and then the name that we pass into this template. Next, let's set up the layout. So inside of the template directory, we want to create a new directory that we'll call layout, and here we want to add our base layout. Now this is going to essentially include all of the base HTML that we want for each one of our pages, and then each one of our templates is going to extend from this base layout. So let's paste this, and if we take a look, we have the exact same thing, but in this case the package name is layout, and then we have this templ base. So this is similar to a quote-unquote normal Go function, and then this is going to return this HTML, which is the base HTML that we usually see within a HTML page. And finally, to be able to render HTML inside of this base template, we need to use the following syntax. So we want to say here children, and then we need to pass 3 dots. And just like this, each time that a template extends from this base template, the contents of that template is going to be placed inside of this body tag, which is the case here with this hello.templ. So if we take a look at this here, we have at layout.base, and then if we pass this inside of curly braces, so if we essentially add this div inside of this layout, then it is going to display the contents that we place here inside of this body tag. Now, one thing that you might have noticed is that we at the moment have this error that says that it could not import this layout package. And the reason for this is because, like I said previously, we have these .templ files, but in order to be able to use them, we need to generate each one of these templates. So let's give this a try. If we type here templ and then generate, this is going to say here complete. We have 2 updates since we have 2 different templates, and then we also have the information about the duration that it took to generate these templates. And now if we save this file, as you can see, the error is gone, and that's because we now have access here to our layout.base. And if we also take a look at the file tree, we now have here base_templ.go, and for this hello template we have hello_templ.go. But generating templates this way is a bit tedious, so we want to be able to do all of this automatically each time that we start our project in dev mode. So let's first of all type here air init, and now just like this we have this air.toml file created inside of our project so that we can use air within this project with different kinds of configuration. So now let's navigate here to our code editor, and as you can see we have all of this configuration to be able to use air within our project. And we want to make a couple of adjustments to this file. So first of all, we want to type here templ generate, and that's the command that we just went ahead and ran to be able to generate our templ files. Then we also want to exclude here this regex, so we want to say here templ.go, and that's because we want for air to not look for changes inside of these files that templ generates, and that's because if air would look inside of these files for changes, then it would essentially create an infinite loop where it would restart over and over again. So we essentially only want air to be looking inside of these templ files that end with the templ extension, and we want to ignore these generated files. And finally, we also want to include a new extension here, which is the templ extension. And just like this, now if we start here our server by using the air command, as you can see, it says here building, then it also says here that it completed the generation of the templates, which is the exact same message that we have here. So we now have templ generating all of our templates each time that we run our server. And just to make sure that we understand exactly what's happening here, if we by any chance want to change here something inside of our project and then we save, this is going to restart automatically, and we are going to have all of these changes essentially be rerun, and then we are going to have the correct templates inside of those Go files. Next, we want to give all of this a try, so we want to navigate here to main.go, and inside of our handler we want to paste the following contents, and we want to delete that hello world message. So now when we save this is going to automatically import here this template package, and then we are going to have access to this template inside of the handler. Now we also want to ensure that we have access to the request, and just like this we are able to render this template into HTML that we can send back to the browser each time that we make a request here to the base path of our server. So to accomplish this, we essentially say here template, then we use this again publicly accessible template by saying here hello, and then we pass the only argument, which is the name. So we are going to say here world, and to be able to render we want to say component.render, and then we need to pass a context and then the response writer. And now if we navigate here to the browser and we type here localhost port 3000, we get this hello world message, and we also have here all of the base layout HTML, and then inside of that base layout we have the contents of our hello template that says here hello world, with also the argument that we went ahead and passed into the template, which was world. So we get here this hello world message. Now before we finish this part of the video, we have one last step, which is to add here all of our generated templates to also be ignored by Git each time that we commit changes to our repo. So we want to add here star_templ.go, and now all of the generated templates are going to be ignored. So if we do this, as you can see, we now only see here the base.templ and hello.templ, and these generated files are going to be ignored by Git. Now the next step is for us to set up and install HTMX. So let's start by first of all creating here a static directory, which is the place where we are going to place all of our static files, and in this case the JavaScript that we are going to download from the CDN and place inside of this directory. Next, we want to use this dub-get package to download the HTMX minified JavaScript file, and we want to place it again inside the static directory and then inside an HTMX.min.js file. So let's run this, and now it goes ahead, it downloads, and then it places the file inside the directory. So if we take a look here, we have this directory, and now we also have this file. Next, let's also ignore this static directory, since we don't want the contents of the directory to be committed into this GitHub repo. So let's head here static and then / and let's save this. And just like this, the static directory is now ignored. Now, to load the HTMX JavaScript file each time that we navigate to a page, we want to add the script tag. So we want to say here script, and then the source is going to be /static /HTMX.min.js. And since we don't yet have a way to render these static files by using Go, we want to accomplish this by pasting this line of code. So we want to say here or.handle, then we want to say /static and then /star. Then we want to strip the prefix, which is /static /, and finally we want to specify here a file server where the directory is going to be dot and then /static. So we essentially want to specify this static directory that we have here. And by adding this line to our server here, we essentially get a way to render static files by using Go. And now if we navigate to the base path of our web server inside of the browser, and you take a look here at the network tab, as you can see, we have this HTMX minified JavaScript file being correctly loaded, and we have the correct content. So as you can see, these are all of the contents that we need to be able to use HTMX inside of our project. Now we want to install and set up TailwindCSS. So let's start by first of all initializing here a new node project. So we want to say npm init-y. And now we get here a newly created package.json file. And inside of this file, we want to first of all add the script that will allow us to run TailwindCSS. So we want to add here to our scripts object a new one that says tdub. And then this is going to use the TailwindCSS package that we'll install in just a second. And we want to specify the input and the output. Now the input is going to be the app.css file that we'll create also in just a second. And the output is going to be static and then app.css. So we want to essentially place a new CSS file inside of the static directory. And since we've already went ahead and set up everything related to static file serving with Golang, if we place this inside of the static directory, we can use it pretty easily inside of our project. Before we continue, let's also ensure that the node modules directory that will be automatically created in just a second doesn't get committed into this GitHub repo. So let's add here node modules and then /. And now we are ready to install TailwindCSS and generate the configuration file. To install it, we want to say here npm install. We want to ensure that it is a dev dependency, and then we want to say TailwindCSS. So let's press here return, and now this is going to install TailwindCSS. After doing this, we want to initialize the tailwind config.js file. So let's type here npx, then tailwindcss, and then init. After pressing return, it is going to create the tailwind.config.js file. And inside of this file, we want to specify here the content, which essentially means that we want to specify where we want TailwindCSS to look for the Tailwind classes so that it can then generate the output file inside of the static directory. So let's add here all of our templ files. So we want to say dot and then /, then template, so this is the template directory, and then we want to tell it to look for all of the files that might be nested also inside of this directory that end with the templ extension. Next, we want to create our input CSS file. So let's create here a app.css file, and inside of this we want to paste the following contents. So we want to say add tailwind base, components, and utilities. And finally, to avoid having to run two different commands, the air command and the TailwindCSS command, we want to also integrate all of this with air to be able to only run that one command and have all of this work together. So let's navigate here to the air toml file. And before the templ generate, we want to also say here npm run tdub, which is the script that we've defined inside of the package.json. And we also want to tell air to exclude the node modules directory when looking for changes inside of our project. So we want to also add here node modules here to the exclude dir. Now we want to include the output CSS file inside of the base layout file. So let's paste this here, and we have the link. This is going to be a style sheet, and we want to say here /static and then /app.css. And finally, let's give all of this a try. So let's navigate here to hello.templ, and we want to say here class, and let's for example say here text to Excel to make sure that all of this works when it comes to TailwindCSS. So now if we start the project by running the air command, we also get this thing here that says that we are running the TailwindCSS command, and then we specify here again the input and the output. So now let's navigate back to the browser, and if we refresh, as you can see, this is now working correctly. So we get here this text, which is to Excel. So this means that Tailwind CSS is correctly working, and we also see here this app.css with all of the generated CSS that is placed inside of this file by Tailwind CSS. Now, the step number 5 is to install and set up Alpine.js. So we essentially want to also place the minified JavaScript file for Alpine.js inside of the static directory, and then we want to include it inside of our project. So let's first of all run again this wget command, and then we want to specify here the Alpine minified JavaScript file that we are going to download from the CDN that the Alpine documentation provides us with. And then we want to specify the output again inside of the static directory, and we are going to call this one alpine.min.js. So now let's press return. This is going to download and place the file inside of the directory. So if we take a look at this here, we now also have here this alpine.min.js. And the next step is for us to also include this inside of the layout. So let's navigate here to the base layout, and we want to add this line in which we specify here that we want to load a script, and it is going to be the Alpine minified JavaScript file. But in this case, we also want to specify here this attribute to tell the browser that we want to defer the loading of this JavaScript file. And now we are finally ready to set up the toast inside of our project, which for now is only going to work on the client side. And in the next step, we are going to do the integration with the backend via HTMX. So let's first of all make here a couple of adjustments to our Tailwind configuration file. So we want to add a couple of new colors here. So we want to add this to this extend object, and then we want to say here colors, and we want to paste these colors, which we'll be using to create our toast notification. So we have the border, the text color, the info, and also the warning. And that's because we want to make a distinction between an information toast, which in this case is going to have the blue color, and then a warning toast, which is going to have the red color. And since we'll also be creating a JavaScript file to be able to help with setting up Alpine.js, we also want to look for all of the classes inside of this file. So let's paste this here. So not only do we want to look for all of the templ files, but we also want to look inside the static directory, and then we want to look at all of the JavaScript files that we'll place in there for Tailwind CSS classes. Now let's create a new directory inside of the template directory that we'll call toast, and then we want to start by creating a new JavaScript file that we'll call toast.js. And again, this file will essentially help us with setting up all of the logic for Alpine.js without having to add all of this in line inside of our templ files. So let's paste here these contents, and now let's go over all of this functionality, which is pretty simple. So we want to first of all add a new event listener. So each time that Alpine is initialized, we want to create here this data toast. So we can essentially then use this inside of our elements or tags to be able to add this toast functionality to a particular, again, element or tag. Then here we can either add data or different kind of functions that is going to modify the data that we have available to us. So the data is going to be the toast, which is an empty array. And then let's go over each one of these functions and what essentially the behavior of each one of these functions are. So we have first of all this add function that is going to take an event, and then it is essentially going to push a new toast into our toasts array. So this is going to have a randomly generated ID, which has here toast dash at the beginning. So this is going to be a string that says toast dash and then a randomly generated number. And then we are going to have the message, which is going to come from the event detail. So we need to type here event.detail.message. And then we are going to also have the type, which again is either info or warning. And finally, we want to start by not showing this toast, and that's because we want to take advantage of the Alpine.js transition functionality. So we are going to essentially, first of all, add this to the DOM hidden, and then after 50 milliseconds, so it is going to not be even noticeable to the end user, but after those 50 milliseconds, we want to then show that toast notification. So this way we can take advantage of the x-show functionality of Alpine and of, again, the transition functionality that Alpine.js provides us with, which will create a much nicer visual experience when we add toast notifications to our web application. Next, we have two similar functions, the show and the remove function, and both of them are going to take an ID. And then inside of these functions, we are going to first of all look for a toast by the specified ID, and then we also want to look for the index of that specified ID. So we say here const toast equals this.toast, so we want to look at all of the toasts that we have available to us, and then we want to find where the toast.id equals the ID that we get here as an argument. And then here, instead of saying find, we want to say find index, which is going to do the exact same thing, but in this case, it is going to return the index of the toast that was found. And then what we essentially want to do is we want to splice this. So we want to look for the index inside of the array. Then we want to remove one item and we want to replace it with the exact same toast, but with the show here set as true. So here inside of this show function, we are going to set this show as true, and then inside of the remove function, all of the rest is exactly the same as with the show function, but instead of saying true here, we want to say false. Then we have the toast init function, which is essentially going to run each time that a new toast notification is added to the DOM. And like I said, we want to first of all have this hidden, even though it was already added to the DOM, and only then after 50 milliseconds we want to show it to be able to have all of the nice Alpine.js transitions available to us. So inside of this, we are going to take here the element as an attribute, which we are going to pass by using Alpine.js. Then we want to get the ID, so we want to say here const ID equals element.getAttribute, and then we want to get the ID. Then we also want to say that let that equals this, so that we still have access to all of these functions after this timeout has passed. So if we wouldn't go ahead and do this, then we wouldn't have access to both the show and the remove functions, and to be able to essentially ensure that we have access to these functions, we want to copy the contents of this into that variable. So then we want to say here set timeout, then we want to specify the function, which is going to be that.show, and we also need to pass here the ID. And then to be able to leave, so to essentially remove this from our list of notifications, we want to say here that dot remove after 4 seconds have passed. And finally, we also want to have a global init function, which is essentially a way for us to add a new global function to the window object. So we want to say that each time that we call window.toast, this is going to be a function that is going to take a message and then a type, which by default is info. And then we want to say here window.dispatch event. We want to dispatch a custom event, which is going to be add-toast. And we then need to specify here the detail, which is going to be the message and the type. So if we take a look here at the top, we have again here the message inside of the detail object and also the type. And that's essentially what we want to pass here. And this is essentially a way for us to have a simpler way to add a new toast notification to our web application inside of the client. Now we want to add the HTML to make all of this work. So inside of this toast directory, let's create a new templ file, which we'll call toast.templ. And inside of this file, we want to paste the following contents. And now let's go over all of this to see exactly what's happening here. So first of all, we want to specify here x-data, which is going to be toast. So we essentially want to initialize this thing that we have here. And it is going to again initialize with this empty array of toasts. Then we have this x-init. And this is essentially the global init function that we want to invoke with this element, which actually we don't really need this here. So we can remove this thing and have this global init be initialized just like this. And that's because this doesn't take any kind of arguments. And when we initialize this again, we want to essentially have an easier way to add those notifications inside of our web application by using JavaScript only. Then, to ensure that this does not get rendered in line with the rest of the HTML, we want to say here template, and then we want to say x-teleport and then body. Then inside of this div, we want to listen for the add-toast event, and each time that this event gets triggered inside of our browser, then we want to invoke this add function. So again, if we take a look at this, we have here this add function that is going to be invoked, and we are going to have access here to the event. And the flow of this is going to essentially be the following. We first of all want to dispatch this event, then this div is going to listen to this event, and then the div itself is going to call this function with the event, and then the toast is going to be added to the list of toasts. The next thing that we want to do is loop through the list of toasts. So we want to say here template and then x-for, and inside of this we want to say toast in toasts, and we also need to specify a key, which is going to be toast.id. And what all of this syntax means is that Alpine.js is going to render a div for each one of the toasts that we have available inside of the array. Then this div is going to first of all have an ID. Then we also want to specify the init function. So in this case, we want to say toast init and pass the element here. Then we also want to say when we want to show this div. So we want to say x-show and then toast.show. And again, the reason we are doing this is to have transitions available to us. And that's the next thing that we want to specify here. So when we enter, we want to go from opacity 0 and scale 90 to opacity 100 and scale 100. And then when we leave, we want to do the opposite of that. Then inside of this div, we want to either render our icon for the info type, or we want to render the icon for the warning type. And finally, we want to bind the toast.message to this p tag or p element. And to load this toast.js file, we want to specify this down here. So we want to say script type equals text /JavaScript, and then we want to say that the source is /static /toast.js. So to ensure that all of this is working, let's copy this. Let's navigate here to static, and let's create here the toast.js and manually paste this here. Now the reason we are doing this is because we also want to ensure that this gets tracked inside of the GitHub repo, but we need to add this to the static directory to be correctly rendered or served in this case by Golang, by again placing this file here inside of the static directory. And now the final step is to include the toast template inside of the base layout. So let's say here add toast, and then we want to invoke this function. And just like this, we have all of this working. So let's give this a try inside of the browser. So we want to start this, and then here let's refresh the page, and we now have this toast.js. And now let's go here to the console, and we want to say window.toast, and like it says here, we can pass the message and the type, which by default is going to be info. So let's say here message, and as you can see, we now get this toast notification that pops up and then automatically disappears 4 seconds after. And if we take a look at this again, as you'll be able to see, we have this initial transition because we do that little trick of initially showing this inside of the DOM, but having it be hidden and then letting Alpine.js take care of showing it with the transitions. So as you can see, we have this enter transition and then also the leave transition. And if we pass here the warning type, as you'll be able to see, we have a different icon here with the color red. If you want to learn more about how to build web applications with HTMX, Go and PostgreSQL, then go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below to join the HTMX Go SaaS blueprint. Now the next step is to add a dismiss functionality to be able to click on the X button and then have the toast be closed before the 4-second timeout. So let's first of all add here a new color that we'll call close, and we'll be using this color for the close button. Then let's navigate to the toast.js file, and we want to add here a new function that we'll call dismiss. Now this is going to take an ID, then we want to do the exact same thing. So we want to say here let that equals this, so that we copy the this object essentially here to this variable. And then after the 50-second, after the 50 millisecond timeout, which is going to be unnoticeable to the end user, we want to say here that remove, and we want to remove this toast from our array. Now to ensure that all of this works correctly, let's copy the contents of this file. Let's navigate here to the static directory and let's replace this manually. And lastly, let's navigate to the toast.templ file. And here we want to make two different adjustments. First, we want to add here a new class, which is going to be relative. And then we want to add here the button that is going to allow us to dismiss the toast notification. First, we have this SVG here inside of the button, which is essentially an X icon. And then we have this @click. So each time that we click on this button, we want to invoke this function. So we want to say here dismiss, and then we pass the ID by grabbing it here from the toast that we have available here inside of this loop. And just like this, each time that we are going to click here, then the toast notification is going to disappear. So let's give all of this a try here inside of the browser. So we want to start here the project, and then if we refresh this, let's go ahead and add here a couple of toast notifications. And if we click here on the notification, as you can see, it is going to be dismissed, and we are not going to see the notification anymore here inside of this web page. And now we are finally ready to integrate the toast notifications with HTMX and our Go backend. So let's first of all create here inside of the template directory a new templ file, which we'll call action.templ. And inside of this, let's paste the following contents. So this is going to first of all have this div, then it is going to have the ID of action. And then inside of this div, we are going to first of all have a button. Then each time we click on the button, we are going to make a request to / with the post method. Then the response that is going to come back from our backend is going to use as the target the ID of action. So we essentially want to replace this entire thing with the response that comes back from our Go backend. And we also need to specify the swapping strategy as outer HTML to ensure that, again, all of this gets replaced and not only the inner contents of this element. Then this button is going to say here send request to backend, which is exactly what it is going to do. And this template is going to take a status, which is going to be a string. And if the status equals sent, then we want to show here sent. And if the status equals unsent, we want to show unsent. And when we initially render this page, it is going to be unsent. And when we make the request to our backend, it is going to update the status. Next, let's navigate to the hello.templ file, and we want to paste this down here. So we want to initially render this with the unsent status. And as the final step, we want to navigate to main.go, and we want to add a new route. So each time that we make a request here with the post method to the base path, then we want to, first of all, trigger a new event inside of the browser. And to accomplish this, we want to use a header that is going to have as the key hx-trigger. And then inside of this, as the contents, we want to add a JSON payload that specifies here, first of all, the key, and this is going to be the event that we want to trigger inside of the browser when this response gets back to the browser from our Go backend. And inside of this object, we want to essentially specify the detail object that we are going to have access to inside of the browser, which again, we want to specify inside of it the message, which is going to say successfully triggered from backend, and then the type, which in this case is going to be info. Now we could go ahead and add inside of our project an easier way to construct this JSON payload, but to keep this simple and easier to understand, we are going to leave this as is. So again, we want to specify the key of hx-trigger, then we want to specify here the event, and finally the detail object. And then we want to render here the component, so we want to say component equals template.action. We want to, in this case, pass the sent status, and finally, similar to what we do up here, we want to render this component. Now, at the moment, we have this error, and that's because we need to start here our command here with error, so that this generates the templates, and now we don't have this error anymore. And if we now try to navigate here back to the browser, as you can see, we have send request to backend. So this is essentially a button. If we take a look at this, we have this button. And now if we click here, send request to backend, we now get this toast notification, which is being triggered from the backend. And just like with the other cases, we can dismiss this by also clicking here on this X icon. So this is it. We now have inside of this project the ability to add those notifications and also be able to dismiss them by clicking on the X button. And we can not only trigger them from the client side by using the window.toast function, but we can also trigger them from our Go backend by using HTMX. I hope all of this was helpful to you, and I'll see you on the next video.